welcome back to the What the Falk Sunderland Preview Podcast. Pre-warning, this podcast is recorded before Sunderland's game against Sheffield United on Wednesday, so hopefully we haven't been stuffed live on Sky and you can enjoy this preview podcast with your morning or afternoon coffee and a positive midweek performance. However, regardless of Wednesday night's result, Alex Neil's side are going to continue on the road this weekend as we visit the Bet365 Stadium. I could have sworn it was called the Britannia last time we went there, as we take on Michael O'Neill's Stoke City. Rather surprisingly, it's actually almost been 6 years since we last visited Stoke, which I can't quite believe. But anyway, that has been a while. So to give us the lowdown on what it's like at Stoke at the moment and what's happened since we last played is David from the excellently titled Stoke City podcast, Wizards of Drivel. David, how are you, mate? You okay?
I'm very well, thank you.
We'll start straight from the top, David. I think, before I do, I think really randomly, this fact occurred to me today that every team we've played in the last 3 championship games have actually played Middlesbrough in their previous fixture. So I don't know what the hell all that's about. But as it is, we're also talking before your midweek game against Borough, so we can't even discuss the game. So it's a random, pointless fact. Your most recent game is a weekend trip to Huddersfield Town. A 3-1 defeat at John Smith Stadium. How was the performance?
Not great. Huddersfield fans before the game were all like coming up talking to us, say, "Oh, you're going to batter us today. You're going to batter us today." And sure enough, Stoke City registered charity 1863 roll into town and completely shoot ourselves in the foot. It wasn't so much that the performance was bad; it was the just mistakes at the back, just kind of obliterated any chance of us coming out of there. We missed a penalty in the first half, and you feel like, oh, if we'd have gone 1-0 up there, their bad form would have meant they would have crumbled. We had a goal disallowed for offside, and then pretty much from that free kick, they go the other end. We pass the ball into them, and they make it 2-1, and we've kind of completely imploded, which is really frustrating considering, there was a bit of optimism going into it. We'd won our first game of the season against Blackpool, and it was one of those really kind of foul atmospheres in the away end at that point, and you kind of you're kind of glad for the championship being like, right, you've got another game in 3-4 days to kind of sort things out. But yeah, certainly not a nice experience.
It's an odd one as well because obviously I watched highlights on, I was going to say Quest, but it's ITV now, isn't it? Looking at the stats though, because outside of that, you can only look at highlights and stats. Not all of us can watch the full 90 minutes of every game, but statistics, more shots, more possession, better passing accuracy, but less goals. Is that a symptom of like a wider problem at Stoke?
Potentially. I mean, I think the kind of unfortunate thing for us against Huddersfield was that the really high quality chances fell to Ben Wilmot, who's a centre half, rather than Dwight Gale or Jacob Brown. And yeah, we created enough stuff in the game to have won it, and we certainly passed the ball very well in possession. Now, our problem has been in previous seasons, we've not been creative enough to create the chances anyway. And I am slightly encouraged by the fact we seem to be creating a bit more in the way of chances than we did last season. It's just that we want them to fall to Dwight Gale. We don't want them to fall to a random centre half. Look, I think it's one of those games that, on reflection, it's probably just a bad game, day at the office kind of thing, rather than like a complete disaster and, a portent of doom. But it is still frustrating considering Huddersfield are really quite terrible and we kind of made them look a lot better than they were. It'll be interesting to see, now we're at home, our only points have come at home this season. Like, are we going to be really front foot positive and just have faith in our own abilities and create those chances for our strikers? So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to about this week with 2 home games coming up.
It's quite interesting you mentioned about the home games coming up. Obviously, we're speaking before the Borough game, so we don't know what the outcome of that is. But I think either way, there's obviously going to be a lot of emphasis on the game for yourselves against ourselves. When newly promoted, it's a game probably looking at the start of the season that you've had. They've just 1 win, 2 defeats, and a cup exit on penalties at Morecambe. And no one really cares about the first round of the League Cup these days because of the difficulties of the league. So I know that it was a weakened squad, but I suppose there's no such thing as a must-win game this early. I don't think that would be probably an over-exaggeration, but it becomes an important game, doesn't it, considering the start you've had?
Yeah, and I agree there's no must-win games, but I think given the context of the last, I don't know, 2 seasons under Michael O'Neill, there's a lot of dissenting voices now and a lot of criticism that's going to come his way. So it's like almost like, in spite of the fact we were kind of the more creative side against Huddersfield, he'll get criticism for being too negative, playing three at the back. And, you can only really get out of this with results. I think people make a lot of a big deal about kind of, attacking football philosophies, all the rest of it. If we won every game in a scrappy 1-0, people wouldn't be bothered. But yeah, I'd say what this week is important is just kind of allaying fears about whether Michael O'Neill can produce results consistently. Because if we, God forbid, lost these 2 games in a week, then all of a sudden we've won 1 in 5, we've lost 4 in 5, and then it's like, I think the board might get a bit twitchy.
It's interesting you mentioned about style of football there, because, like I said before, I can't quite believe it's been 6 years. It feels like about 20 years ago nowadays, but a lot has happened. But when I think about Stoke as a team, because it's been so long since we've played here, you do think of almost the Rory Delap years, which has obviously massively changed. And I sort of also remember the period of time where Mark Hughes came in and tried to sort of change it a little bit and look a bit fancier, a little bit nicer on the eye. And effectively, if you look at the basics alone, that was maybe the start of Stoke City's downfall, quote unquote, if a Sunderland fan can say such a thing. What is the Stoke City we're going to be facing? Like, is it back to the old school Stoke? Is it something completely different? Are you now possession based side?
Certainly we should be, and we are trying to be a bit more possession based. My frustration sometimes is we will not back our own abilities and kind of resort to hoofing it, even though we're not built for that. So when you think of perhaps old Stoke sides, you picture like a big hulking centre forward bringing the ball down, like a Peter Crouch, Kenwyne Jones, John Carew, a unit like that. Whereas now, Dwight Gale, Jacob Brown, Tyrese Campbell, I think they're all possibly just over 6 foot, but they're not target men. And we have mostly been reliant on our wing backs to produce low crosses into the box for them, and occasionally likes of Lewis Baker in midfield. Will Smallbone is on loan from Southampton. They can break forward and kind of create stuff from the edge of the area. So we are a lot more on the deck than your stereotypical image of a Stoke side, which is nice. But yeah, the frustration is sometimes like, if we're losing, if we're sort of up against it, will we just kind of lump it forward and just hope that someone does something? Because that's a kind of a bit of a concern. Like we've got really good footballers in there. Baker, who I mentioned, Josh Timon at left wing back's a really tidy footballer, and Tyrese Campbell on his day can be fantastic as well. But it's just if we can kind of keep the momentum of the first few games, not in terms of like shooting ourselves in the foot defensively, but just kind of attacking on the front foot, working the ball into the box, working the ball out to the wing backs, and just kind of keep that going, then we should be okay this season.
You mentioned Kenwyne Jones there. My heart skipped a beat. I do miss you, Kenwyne. It's still early doors in this season, so I suppose in a sense when you're doing like preview shows, it's really difficult to be like, well, how's the mood? Because it's very reactive at the start of the season. You want to win all your games, but then it doesn't mean you win the league. If you lose them all, you could still win the league, or you could just go down and never win a game ever again. It's that kind of start of the season, but I think we'll delve back into last season a little bit to get more of an overview if possible. A 14th place finish. Since Stoke have gone down, they haven't really troubled the playoff spots, which is a shame considering how long you were in there. You didn't go straight through the league like us, so it could be worse. But there's been no danger of relegation, really, no real push for promotion. How was the feeling towards like the back end of last campaign, or maybe when the season ended, between the fan base?
Frustration generally. I think, like Michael O'Neill, as I mentioned, he's had quite a bit of criticism because we are always waiting for the push on. Are we going to push on from mid-table to being a playoff contending side? And whilst it is frustrating that at the time of recording, he doesn't seem to be able to have achieved that yet, what it's more a consequence of is financial fair play. And you know the sort of analogy of a guy sort of shoveling water off his boat, like he's got a bucket and he's desperately trying to get the water off the boat fast, but he's slower than the water coming in. So that's what it's felt like over the past 5 or 6 years. We've been trying to get rid of hangers on from the Premier League or the first season of the Championship kind of days, and we've been replacing them with lesser and less expensive players. And in some cases that's worked out. We've signed better players. In some cases we're still trying to find an answer for like an age-old problem, despite huge amounts of squad turnover. Like there are still players on the books like Peter Atebo, who we signed first season we came down. So like he was a star of the 2018 World Cup, and then but he's still bizarrely on our books. I think he was on loan at Watford last season. Players like Tommy Smith, Joe Allen, who Joe Allen was there in the Premier League, of course, but Joe Allen was on some kind of 50 grand a week wages. And so we're kind of fighting an uphill battle on the transfer front. So I do have a lot of sympathy for O'Neill in that regard. It is really annoying that, like you say, we've just kind of middled around these same positions in the league. But there are circumstances that beyond that make it kind of more difficult for O'Neill. Like the reason we're in this position is because we went down appointing Paul Lambert with 10 games to go for God knows what reason, and then getting Gary Rowett in, and rather than having a transfer strategy, we had a policy of, oh, I've heard of him, let's pay £10 million for him. And so we get James McLean, Tom Ince, Benik Afobe, and a few other complete duffers for like huge wages, huge amounts of money. And then it's like, oh, these aren't very good. And then Rowett inevitably goes. Nathan Jones comes in. He's got a little bit less money than Rowett. He can't do anything. And then we sort of invoke the dreaded Sunderland word, sort of 10 games into Jones's first full season in charge, because we'd won two. Well, I don't think we won our opening 10 games, and we won 2 in opening 14. And then it looked like, oh, bugger, we're going down here. So O'Neill came in, kept us up, and has sort of established us in mid-table, whilst it's kind of ridiculous that we are probably one of the richest teams in the league in terms of ownership, and yet we are really hamstrung by financial fair play, which includes our own mistakes from 4 or 5 years ago. So we've just had this kind of 4-year hangover, essentially.
It's quite a funny one with O'Neill because, and again, this is the beauty of doing these pods, I suppose. It educates me as well, but from the outside looking in, he's actually been there longer than most managers are in the Championship, because managers last like 5 games these days, it seems. I'm more exaggerating slightly, but you know where I'm coming from. He's been there since November 2019, kept you up first season. I do remember Nathan Jones going to Stoke and you struggling really badly, and then going back to Luton and seemingly doing quite well. As it is, though, O'Neill's kind of, like I said before, you've kind of just middled around that middle of the Championship and done effectively in the nicest possible way. Nothing too dangerous, nothing too exciting. Is that because he is so hamstrung, or is he viewed in? You mentioned dissenting voices before, so people starting to wonder if he's the right man? Or
yeah, I mean, they got booed off at half time at Huddersfield, which I don't know. Football fans are fickle, so you maybe won't read too much into that. But I would say there's a lot of people who are ready for change now. Our board have kind of got a reputation for not being trigger happy and like sticking by managers, which is, I suppose, a good thing overall. But I don't see them getting rid of O'Neill unless we're like really in a relegation scrap. And I think that might be the kind of thinking there, that they seem relatively content with kind of where we are now, and like kind of getting rid of this 5-year hangover and then hopefully kind of gradually building our way back up. There certainly at the ground there seems to be a real kind of undercurrent, which isn't like everyone's screaming for the manager's head straight away, but it's almost like, the minute there's like a pass back that seems a bit unnecessary, or someone plays the ball out of play, there's like groans instantly, and it's like bitterness. It's sort of what I associate with like an Everton crowd, sort of like really kind of tetchy. And that's how it's felt for the last 2 or 3 seasons. Well, obviously not the COVID season. COVID season, we actually started really all right, and I started to wonder, oh God, is it our fault? It's felt really sort of, we are like, I don't know, say if we lost to Port Vale in the cup, with that kind of result away from like, rioting or whatever. But yeah, it's not been pleasant. You just want you kind of want a boring game these days because it stops people getting too kind of hyper emotional. That I think the nature of the championship's a nasty shock to some people. Still, it's like, yeah, you could lose easy as anything.
We got that shock quite quickly, and sadly, we all documented it on a Netflix TV show. So we know that similar pain. Thankfully, we haven't tasted it as yet at the time of speaking. It's always really fun to look back at former players on either side. We've mentioned Kenwyne Jones, and I thought there's bound to be some that are still there because there was a point where we sold all of our players to you. They did better than us, or we did better than what they did with Sunderland, should I say, sorry. And inevitably, you finished above us. Alas, I can only really pick two, and one of them's not even there anymore. But I do have to mention him. He's someone that we liked quite a lot. And unfortunately, his departure, touching on the Netflix documentary, was a big reason in us not going back up to the championship in first season, in my opinion. Josh Maja, obviously, you had him on loan last year. He hasn't come back. I've seen that he was linked. We really tipped him to do really well when he left the club, but he's stagnated somewhat. How did he perform for Stoke?
Yeah, see, I quite like Josh Maja, but I think he was a kind of maybe a consequence of that kind of phenomenon I was talking about earlier, where if we're kind of up against it, we kind of lump it forward. And I quite liked him. He seemed a very tidy footballer. I think he got 1 or 2 goals for it. Oh, just the one. And yeah, he was just one of those that just never really clicked for us. But that could apply to, God knows how many players we've signed since we've gone down. That could apply to 30, 40 players who have ability but just don't really work in our team for one reason. And it's like quite unforgiving in that it's like, oh, loan spell didn't really catch fire, so right, okay, we'll try something else, and we'll try something else, and we'll try something else, rather than maybe sign him and try to develop him further, or get that play that we'd obviously seen bits of him at Sunderland, and seen that he was doing okay at Bordeaux, I guess. But yeah, that there's so many players that when we sign, you think, oh, that's quite exciting, a kind of youngish, young forward player, and it's like, oh, well, it could be the fault that all 40 of these players we've signed are individually quite bad, or it could be there's something wrong with the way we're using these players. And it's definitely more the latter, I think.
On the flip side, I was thinking of players that we took from Stoke recently, and it didn't take me that long to go down my squad list when I, of course, remember that we took Danny Bart from me last year. He played a big role in us getting promoted. He actually came in, had a fantastic debut, then scored a wonderful diving header on goal as we lost 6-0 against Bolton. That was the end of Lee Johnson. Alex Neil took over. The rest is history. But I vaguely remember, as you do on Twitter, which I always say Twitter's not a barometer, yet I always look at it if we sign someone to see what the opposition fans' reactions are like. And I vaguely remember Stoke fans weren't too pleased about it. I was going to say sale, but I think it was a free transfer. What are Stoke's memories of Danny Barton, and what kind of esteem is he held in?
I really like Danny Bart. I think he filled a role for us as being like, so I think when he came in, it was like Ryan Shawcross was leaving or sort of retiring, or he's perpetually injured, and he fulfilled that kind of old-fashioned centre-back kind of role. Very, very unflashy, very, very sort of, he will knock it into the stands if he's under any kind of pressure whatsoever. And, a decent threat from set pieces as well. And I've got no issue with Danny Bart at all. There was occasionally moments, perhaps towards the end of his time at Stoke, where a pacey striker or two would roast him if it was like a sort of one-on-one scenario, and that was a thing. Like, you try to reduce those scenarios as often as possible, because he's just going to get done for pace, because he's kind of he's just a big unit, and he's push it other side of 30, and that's going to happen. But yeah, I thought he was a really good professional. You wouldn't have had him down as like them being any problems with him. He was just kind of maybe a Tony Pulis would have absolutely loved a player like Danny Bart, because he was just kind of old school and did his job with kind of a minimum amount of fuss. So yeah, well, I'm trying to think when he went, like, who would we have had at the back? I think probably James Chester, who none of us really liked, was still there as well. So there was maybe a bit of, oh, we're getting rid of like someone who's fairly dependable, and Trying to think who we were bringing in now. We were bringing Harry Souttar, who is much more of, I think, the complete package as a centre half. He's incredible. He's 6'8", Australian international, and can play a ball out really well. Very good distribution, as well as being an absolute unit as well. So I think it was the right time for him to go, and clearly, he made the right decision. Being part of your promotion team and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think Danny Bart. Someone we liked, and certainly one of the better signings we made once we came down.
Yeah, I think we quite like Danny Bart as well. He got sort of dropped when Alex Neil came in. I know he was injured. Tell a lie, he was injured. But since he's came back in, he's never really moved, and he started this season as well. Our defence hasn't looked tremendous this season, but I'm not going to put that down to Danny Bart. So I think we're quite happy with him. But I was looking at your transfer window this summer. Now, in League One, I'm used to just a turnover of players coming in on free transfers, loan deals. 10 of them to 15 go out, 10 or 15 come back in, minimum 8. In the Championship, it's been a bit different. It's been 1 or 2 players here or there, but Stoke have been really active. Like you said, a huge turnover once again. I was going to list them all, but I thought I'd just go with the 3 that I recognised most. You brought in Aidan Flint, Josh Laurent, and Dwight Gale. I can't remember where Aidan Flint came from. I think Cardiff. Obviously, Laurent came from Reading, and Dwight Gale's come from them lot. But there's been another 9 or 10 players that's come with it. Which of the new signings have made the biggest impact so far, be that positive or even negative?
Well, negatively, I think the highlights of the Huddersfield game will not show Aidan Flint in a very good light at all. I mean, there were some doubts when he signed, he's one of those defenders who's, again, wrong side of 30 and just seems a bit slow and cumbersome. And certainly what the evidence so far seems to suggest he is that as well. So there's a big question marks about Aidan Flint. Josh Lawrence, a good player. But again, we just have this Stoke-itis thing of, they might be a good player, but they're going to be crap because they're playing for us now. And nothing kind of has that vibe more than Dwight Gale. I just want Gale to get chances because he's a kind of 6-yard box kind of player. I think in terms of signings that's made the most positive impact, I would say it's probably Harry Clark, who scored against Blackpool, a kind of front foot wing back on loan from Arsenal. He did a Ronaldo celebration, which has kind of turned me against him slightly, but other than that, seems quite a good player. They seem to be okay signings, but we just need a few more games for them to really click. Will Smallbone, actually, I think I mentioned him earlier. We've signed him to kind of be a temporary Nick Powell replacement because Nick Powell, made of biscuits, injured, but he seems quite a tidy number 10 kind of player, and hopefully he can progress as well.
It's funny you mentioned Nick Powell there. I can't exactly remember what it was, but he was once fined, I think, at Wigan. I seen the fines wall or something from years ago, and he was fined for abusing someone, and the abuse was quite funny. Not like physical abuse, I think calling a player a name in a banter-esque, to quote Alan Partridge way. And I can't quite remember what it was that he said, but it was hilarious. I must find it. One player that I kind of didn't touch on before, and the same happened last week. Did you find it?
So I found it, yeah. I think it went viral, this, didn't it? But it says there's player, Windass, hot packs, someone no GPS, someone this and this. Powell, player Powell, reason disrespect, amount £20, and underneath disrespect it says, "I told your mum."
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's kind of worth the £20 fine, to be fair to him. Talking about former players, I forgot about this last week when we spoke to QPR. It's weird. These shows are kind of aligning one into another because you all play Middlesbrough beforehand and you all have Jack Clark on loan previously before we signed him. Jack's really early in his career with Sunderland. He's really early in his career in general, but he came really good for Sunderland during the playoffs, and he's had a really good start of the season. Was probably our best player on the pitch on the opening day of the season, and had a really good game at Bristol City. Actually, probably a better game against Bristol City. He's done really well for us, but QPR had him on loan, Hughes had him on loan, and he didn't really do too much from what I can remember. And I think that was probably one of the things that Sunderland fans saw when we first got him and went, he hasn't done too much when he's been on loan there, despite the fact he did quite well at Leeds. How was he viewed at Stoke during his loan move?
It was one of those kind of, in amongst all the squad shown, you can kind of forget about players like Harry Clark, to be honest with you. I think he played about 10 or so games in, might have even been the COVID season. And I think with players in that COVID season, there's a kind of sense of, oh, it doesn't really count because we can't remember any of the games because we weren't there for any of them. So I think he signed along with Rabbi Matondo, another winger. I think Matondo made slightly more of an impact, but neither of them really kind of forced their way into kind of first team contention. It wasn't so much that I saw anything bad from Clark. It was just that I didn't see anything kind of spectacular from him either. And so if he's on loan, and you kind of have to really kind of make a mark in that sense. So he was fine. I don't think Michael O'Neill was happy with fine, to be honest. And like, it was, I think when he went back, it was a kind of sense of, yep, tried that, didn't work. We'll try 6 more wingers before next season, kind of thing, and just hope that some of them work.
Keep you on while I said the same. I'm pleased to see that we were the beneficiaries eventually. No offense. I think, like I said before, with Sunderland, we used to play each other regularly, Sunderland and Stoke. It was a regular game. Always ding dong. I remember getting beat 3-2 with 2 goals in the last 8 minutes. I think it was John Carew. We've touched on the Charlie Allen game. There's been I remember a game at the Stadium Light where I think Stephen Malbronk missed a penalty and Kenwyn ended up getting 2. Obviously, Kenwyn then went to you. There's plenty of things that kind of align us, but I think one thing that I've pointed out as well is we haven't played each other for ages, and I think the view of each of these teams probably vastly different to what it used to be. But from what you've seen of Sunderland recently, what are the players that concern you going into the game on Saturday that you think could damage you?
Well, Jack Clark obviously concerns me because he used to play for us, and it's just kind of inevitable. I've been kind of keeping an eye on Sunderland because one of my mates is a Sunderland fan. I'm going to watch your game at Bramall Lane, as a matter of fact. So clearly, you guys have had no real issues scoring goals this season, which bodes quite well. Patrick Roberts, obviously very, very good player. Even when you're in the doldrums of League One, there was always players I recognised in Sunderland, like Aidan McGeady, who, God, how old is Aidan McGeady now? Because he feels like he's been around forever.
I think he's
Ellis Sims is 36 with Sims and Roberts, and there'll be someone else who I've completely forgotten for you up front as well. But
Ross Stewart,
clearly,
how dare you forget Ross Stewart?
Ross Stewart, yes, Ross Stewart. My apologies. And yeah, so that's what worries me from a kind of Stoke point of view is, your forward players, are they going to, have a bit of a field day? Because you've clearly got some good players as well. Like, I saw you guys play last season at Hillsborough, where not your playoff semi-final, but your 3-0 midweek league defeat, and thought, well, you guys clearly aren't very good. But there was just something not quite right there. But I couldn't work out what it was, because I thought individually your players seemed quite good, but maybe it was just one of those terrible days for you. Like Luke O'Nien, Lyndon Gooch possibly was playing. Pritchard, or have you signed
playing? Yeah.
And they seem like all quite tidy footballers, but I think they maybe just seemed just terrified. So yeah, that kind of attacking prowess that you've demonstrated already this season has me a bit concerned. Now, conversely, like if you're conceding goals to goalkeepers, then I think, actually, we could maybe exploit that. So, especially if Danny Bart is playing, and like as I said before, he's a kind of no nonsense player. But if we play Jacob Brown and Tyrese Campbell up against him, I'm a bit confident with that. So. So I think it could be potentially a high-scoring game, but whenever I say that, it's always shit.
To be fair, they've all been relatively high-scoring for us thus far. This is prior to the Sheffield United game, as you know as well. This is a question I kind of don't ask enough, and I really, really should on these preview shows. It's really hard sometimes to find a good bar to get a pint where away fans are allowed. I've been to Stoke before. I'm aware that not all of them allow them in. But where would be the best place for away fans to grab a pint if they want to, and they're listening on the way to the stadium as we speak?
Right. So what happens a lot with away fans, if you're arriving on the train, you tend to get funneled out and like shepherded towards these shuttle buses to the ground, which is a bit crap, I think. And also a bit crap is the fact the ground's location is quite some distance away from most of the city. So you've got a Harvester and a Power League near the ground. I think both of them welcome away fans. I don't think there's any problem with them, but they're a bit, they are what they are as pubs, There's some nice places in Stoke, Stoke-on-Trent is weird. There's the town of Stoke within the city of Stoke-on-Trent. That is the place where you get off the train at if you're coming by train. So there is a place called the Glebe on Glebe Street in Stoke. It's near the Stoke Minster Church, and there is one which is a Titanic pub called it's completely gone. But there's a Titanic pub further into Stoke as well, which is really nice. There is also, and you may have to be a bit sneaky about this, there's what's called a bod bar in Stoke-on-Trent station. Now the Titanic brewery have these they're quite nice, quite small little pubs. And it's all Titanic ales, and if you're into your ales, you'll probably find something there to enjoy. But they are funny about football fans being in. So if you maybe sort of cover up your football shirt, restrict your accent as much as possible, you should be fine to sneak a couple in there. But that applies to Stoke fans as well. They're very funny about football fans in general going into a pub in the train station, which I guess is understandable. So town of Stoke, there is Hanley as well, which is kind of the city centre, I suppose. But I think it's going to be a real faff to go there and then go back to the stadium. So, yeah, those would be the places I would recommend, or not recommend in the case of Hanley. If you've made it to Burslem, you've gone too far and turn around.
I'll take the last bit of advice, especially. I have got no score predictions right so far, but we always end it on score predictions. I think someone at one point is going to realize that I know nothing about what I'm talking about. Hence, I get so many predictions wrong. But I quite fancy a draw. I fancy a 1-1, kind of a bit of a drab game. I'm going, so I hope we don't get beat. It's my first away of the season, sans pre-season in Portugal, which got abandoned at half time. I'll say 1-1. I think Stoke might score first. I think we might pull it back late, a little bit like the Jermaine Defoe game, I think, a few years ago, where we scored very, very late on. So I'll take 1-1. But David, where are you going for Saturday's game?
It's my first home game of the season. I'm kind of dreading it. But what I will do is I'll make a different prediction to one I'll make on Wizards of Drivel, and I will make a different prediction to the one I'll make on my betting app, and then on one of these platforms I will appear like a genius. So I'm going to say Stoke are going to win 2-0.
Okay, I'll not take that, but nonetheless, it is very much a Stoke away result for Sunderland from my memory. David, I think people recently have been saying a lot of people really enjoy sort of listening back to the opposition podcast, their review shows rather than mine, which I don't know what that means, but nonetheless, I understand why. If they wanted to listen to obviously your reaction to the game rather than mine or a Sunderland fans' reaction, where can they find the podcast?
Yeah, so we usually record and release on a Sunday night. So if you want to hear our misery or kind of, see what we made of your team, there's a chance that we could completely gloss over, if we win, that we'll completely gloss over Sunderland as well and just kind of, have a huge bout of self-congratulation. But regardless, it's at Wizards of Drivel on Twitter, and the podcast is out on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and if you just search Wizards of Drivel in pretty much anywhere where you get podcasts from, then we should be there.
Awesome. David, thanks very much for popping on. Always good to catch up. You give me a good laugh. I don't know if that's a good thing, considering we wouldn't be talking about serious football, but nonetheless, hopefully the listeners have enjoyed it as well. For anyone listening, like, share, subscribe if you want. If you don't, I don't care. That's completely fine. Just enjoy your weekend. And how are the lads, I guess.